and girls. A special hello goes out to the director of media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Boland. Nice seeing you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Willand. WHA legend Larry Lund, the WHA's 12th all-time leading scorer, is our guest on episode 36 of the PHA Podcast. Before becoming an original Houston Aero at the age of 32, Lund played 12 outstanding seasons in the minors, mostly in the Western Hockey League with Seattle and Phoenix. With Gordie Howe and the Aeros, Lund centered the go-go line with Andre Hinse and Frank Hughes as the Aeros won the Avco Cup in 1974 and 1975. His best season was 1974-75 when he led the Aeros in points with 108. That was good for 5th overall in the WHA. He also played in the annual WHA All-Star game and had a great postseason as well. In his WHA career, Lund recorded 426 points in 459 regular season games and added 65 points in 59 postseason contests. In addition to his stellar playing career, Larry is well known as the founder of the Okanagan Hockey School, the longest-running hockey school in North America. Larry is a member of the BC, as in British Columbia, Hockey Hall of Fame. Larry was a great interview. He takes you behind the scenes of those colorful Houston Aeros teams, and especially his roommate, Gordie Howe. And we greatly appreciate the letters and great reviews. We do the show for you fans, so we appreciate your feedback. Our audience has grown tremendously since we began last year, and we're very grateful for your support. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Larry Lund. Well, we have back on the show Larry Lund, and we're thrilled to have him. He's a number 12 all-time leading scorer in the World Hockey Association, won 2 Avco Cups with the Houston Aeros, won 4 other cups throughout pro hockey. A lot of people know him from his founding of the Okanagan Hockey School, of course, and he is a member of the British Columbia Hockey Hall of Fame. Number 13, Larry Lund. Thanks so much for being with us, Larry.
Good. Well, you're welcome. I'm excited to chat with you. That's some good memories from the WHA days.
Absolutely. And before you get there, though, you start out with Edmonton and then end up in Muskegon in the IHL. And you really kind of hit your stride in the Western Hockey League. Now, that's a real underrated league in hockey history because at the time, there were either 6, then eventually 12 teams in the National Hockey League. A lot of real good players played in the Western League. Can you talk a little bit about the Western League in general as in the caliber of play in the league?
Yeah, I sure could. So when I went there in 1963-64 season, ironically, Bud Poyle was the coach and general manager, and his son is now the general manager of the Nashville Predators. So that's a little bit of history or trivia. But when I first went there, there was a requirement to carry 2 rookies on the team. And from there on up, it was seasoned veterans who was winding down their career, whether it's in the NHL or whatever. So there was some really quality hockey players. And there was, as you said earlier, there's only 6 teams in the NHL at that time. So it was a league with a lot of experience and maybe not quite as much speed as say the Central League at that time, but the experience from goaltenders on out was tremendous.
You end up in Seattle in 65-66, and you've got a strong team there. I was curious about now that Seattle's on the horizon for the National Hockey League. What was the fan support like in Seattle? What was the hockey environment like back then?
Yeah, it was good, and we had it was just after the World's Fair in Seattle, so they built the Seattle Civic Center. So we had a state-of-the-art arena to play. I think it held around 12,000 people. So it was probably nicer than the majority of the NHL rinks at that time. So we were fortunate to have that facility. And also we were fortunate to have some really good teams. We won 2 Lester Patrick Cups in a row in Seattle. So good strong team and lots of competition in the league too.
What would be, if you look back at the Seattle Totems, what was your biggest rival in the league at that time?
The Portland Buckaroos, they were just down the freeway from us, and so there was a natural geographical rivalry as well as an on-ice rivalry. So, and Hal Lako was the coach of the Portland Buckaroos, a former NHL player, and a very successful coach. He went on to coach in the National League after that. So they had a strong team as we did, and the Vancouver Canucks were in the league at that time too, and they had some great hockey teams there. So, but overall, the Portland Buckaroos were by far the biggest rivalry.
One player that was a legend in the league and on your championship teams was often the leading scorer, Guile Fielder. I don't really know much about him, except for the fact that he was certainly one of the great players in the history of the league. What type of player was he like?
Guile, he was a wizard on the ice. He's a nice skater, handled the puck well. Wasn't obviously wasn't a physical player. He was fairly small in stature, but he was shifty and he could move the puck around and scored some goals too. But primarily he was a playmaker.
Mm-hmm. Larry, when you look at these rosters, a lot of future NHL and WHA players on them in Seattle, and particularly in Phoenix. How was it that you ended up in 69-70 as to be a Phoenix Roadrunner?
I was in Seattle at the previous 4 years, and things had gone a little sideways as far as my career was concerned, and so they made a trade. Tommy McVie, I don't know if you probably know that name. He coached in Washington and played. He was a great minor leaguer. So they traded Tommy McVie for myself, and I went to Phoenix, and probably one of the best moves I've ever made in my life. We went there and played in Phoenix for 3 years and had a great team and really a nice area to play in too. So we enjoyed it in Phoenix for the 3 years I was there.
Absolutely. You become synonymous with two other players, Andre Hinse and Frank Hughes, the Go-Go line, which will come into the story later. How did that line come together in your stay in Phoenix? And talk a little bit about the chemistry that you three had.
Yeah. We were put together just at the last part of training camp. We were in Peterborough, Ontario. We were training with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We were a farm team of theirs. And, from one of the first practices on, things just seemed to, there was a chemistry and a synergy there with the three of us that, I don't think anybody put a lot of thought into, when they put the line together. Mm-hmm. But just from the first time on the ice till the end of our careers, we just had a chemistry that was phenomenal.
So Larry, it's interesting when you're playing for Phoenix, at least from a distance. You're playing in a excellent market at that time, a real strong hockey market for the Western League. Great weather, teams doing well, excellent line mates. I guess my question is, for a lot of guys, playing in the Western Hockey League under those circumstances is a good enough league in and of itself, if that's where it all ended. In other words, it was a good experience there in the Western League. It wasn't just like slugging in the minors and everything. It was a good place for you to play, and you seemed to be pretty happy there, and certainly you were productive.
Yeah, and I guess another part of it was too, my salary was comparable to an average NHL salary at that time too. So that was a factor. I was being compensated very well. And another part of the reason I wanted to stay in Phoenix for the 3 years I did, I was working on my business degree from Arizona State University. So I did that during the off season, and I'd take a couple classes during the season, evening classes or whatever. So, and my wife was working on her master's at the time too. So that it really worked out well for us for that the whole overall environment. Wasn't just hockey, but and we made a lot of good friends.
Absolutely.
In Phoenix as well.
One guy I have to ask you about, he was kind of a colorful character, kind of a mystery to me, but a colorful guy who later became an actor, Howie Young.
Yeah.
What's
well, from your early description of him, you pretty well knew who you were talking about. Yeah, Howie's our teammate for 2 years in Phoenix, and Howie had turned over a bit of a new leaf in life. He was he quit drinking completely, and when he came to Phoenix, he was a great asset to our team and a great teammate. And I think you touched on his skating ability. I don't think anybody in the game, the NHL, Western League, American League, skated better than Howie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's always when you talk to people who saw him in Detroit, and everybody talked about his potential, but his mind wasn't, and his lifestyle habits weren't quite there at that point. Speaking of tough guys and everything, Larry, your penalty minutes, I don't know if it was by design or not, in your last 2 years at Phoenix really jump, as do your points. So you were always a very consistent scorer, but you ended up scoring over 90 points in your last 2 years and getting over 140 penalty minutes. Was there a correlation between the two?
Well, I think that for me to be successful, I had to play with with a bit of passion and some aggression too. So that, I think is sort of indicative of how I was playing, is how physical I was playing too. So they kind of went hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And I think the records the statistics would bear that out.
Absolutely. So now, at the end of the 71-72 season, something happens in the world of hockey, and that is a new league is born, the World Hockey Association, and they place a team in Houston, coached by and managed by your old teammate in the Western League, Bill Dineen. How did when did Bill first reach out to you, and how did that whole scenario unfold?
Yeah, well, that's a bit of an interesting story in itself. They had and I hadn't communicated with Bill really about the WHA. We were still playing in Phoenix and, really involved there. But the WHA had a priority agreement where you could draft or protect 4 guys. And I was one of the 4 that Bill Dineen protected. And so I saw that later on, so I thought, if they were going to use one of their 4 picks to protect me, that they would certainly be interested in signing me. And ultimately the whole line, Frank Hughes and Andre Hinse, was drafted by Houston, and we ended up playing there. But I'll tell you an interesting story. So anyway, I had gotten an agent, a lawyer, and was representing me, and Houston had come up to Penticton where my summer home was, and they had offered us a contract. My lawyer had come up, and they had made arrangements to meet in Penticton. So the negotiations were going on, and I guess the team was starting at a lower point than we wanted to end up at. So, and at that point, I had belonged to Toronto, and they had in their centerman, it was Normie Ullman, Daryl Sittler, Jimmy Harrison, and Davey Keon. So that's a pretty tough tough lineup to crack. But anyway, they lost a couple players to the WHA, and so there was a call, and we had said to Bill in Houston that we were negotiating with Toronto, and they had made us a pretty nice offer. And I think Bill might have thought maybe my lawyer was just trying to push the envelope here to get the salary up. Mm-hmm. So the phone rang down in the lobby, and it was for Don Harris, who was my attorney. And Bill happened to know that Don was out, so he picked the phone up and just said hello. And the guy on the other end was Jim Gregory, the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. and so Bill made up a fictitious name. I guess the guy said, "Well, who am I speaking to?" And he said, "I'll have Don call you." So I guess at that point, Houston realized that Toronto was serious, and I think my contract probably the next offer was a third more than the previous one. So it was a bit of a coincidence that he would be down in the lobby, and I was I loved that story. I got a big kick out of it, and plus it helped my bank account at the end of the year too.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I talk to guys, especially guys who played back then, sometimes just the little things like that, the little twist of fate, luck, and coincidence, and how much of an impact it has on your life going forward.
Yeah, no, it isn't. And as a side note to that, Toronto did offer me a good contract and a guaranteed number of games, but I said I was sort of made my mind up, and I wasn't changing it at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a interesting first season in the WHA, I have to imagine, but you have a unique situation with the Aeros where the team is populated with a lot of real good character veteran guys. You have your teammates from Phoenix, but you also have guys like Paul Popiel and John Shella and Wayne Rutledge. Talk a little bit about your Gordie Lavoisier. So talk a little bit about year.
And Ted Taylor, we have to throw him in there.
Of course,
Murray
Teddy
Hall.
Taylor. Murray Hall. So this is a real old school, hard-nosed team. But I always get the impression when talking to guys from that team in that era that it had to be a very close-knit group.
Yeah, it was. And the one player who wasn't there, and we can get into this a little later, is Andre Hinse. He decided at the last minute to stay in Phoenix, so he didn't come and join us. And we'll talk about that a little later and the impact he had. But it was, and I think what happened, Bill Dineen's a very shrewd person. And he had, if you looked at our lineup, he had played with most everybody on that team. So he was able to, to know what the players were more than just from a hockey point of view. He wanted character players, and it was mainly guys that he had played with or coached against. And so he had a leg up on most of the other coaches and general managers in the league at that time because, he had just probably only been 2 or 3 years out of playing, and then he'd been coaching previously. So that was, I think, a big advantage for Bill to have that knowledge.
What was your impression of the league in year one? I mean, I'm sure that there were some things that weren't running quite smoothly in the first year. I mean, it is the first year of a team, but what was your whole feeling that first year? Was it something that you said to yourself, yeah, I'm happy I made this decision? Or were there moments when things got a little crazy? You had to have a lot of travel coming from Houston. Talk a little about some of the challenges in year one.
Yeah. Well, just to back up just a bit, when I really decided I was going to go to Houston was the day that Bobby Hull signed with the Winnipeg Jets, and I talked to Bobby a lot of times about that. And I don't think, I'm not sure, but I don't think I would have made the decision to go if he hadn't signed, and I said to Bobby, I owe you a huge debt of gratitude for signing. So that was sort of before the beginning of it. But yeah, we traveled. We had our own plane. It was not a jet, so we did a lot of. We was probably in the air as much as we were on the ground. But so we become very close as a team. And you know what, Mark? I didn't really. Once we got playing, I got sort of wrapped up in the whole thing, and I didn't really care and think a lot about what the other teams were doing. Teams were moving here and folding there and whatever they were doing. I didn't really care. And so, our ownership was solid at the time, and. So we were just in the moment and wanting to win, and we did fairly well the first year. We didn't have any big name players on our team. We didn't have the Bobby Hulls or the Mark Tardifs, J.C. Trombleys. We just had a good, solid team, and we won the first round. We lost the second round to Winnipeg, but we were just concentrating on playing and doing the best we could do.
Going to next year, of course, something very big happens in the history of hockey, and that is that the Howe family joins the team. And Andre Hinse comes up from Phoenix.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned Andre Hinse because I'll get into that a little later. Yeah.
Because so now you go from a good, solid team to a very, very strong team that could compete in either league. Talk a little bit about, first of all, the arrival of Gordie Howe, how you heard about that and what your reaction was to that.
Yeah. Well, it goes back. Doug Harvey was our assistant coach, and I think Doug Harvey was the one who suggested drafting Mark and Marty. And some people, I read that it was Colleen Howe's idea, but I think it was Doug Harvey's. Him and Bill were at the draft, and Doug was a very intelligent guy. And he said, well, let's draft him. And then they phoned up talked to Gordie, and Gordie said, well, how would you like to have a third Howe on the team? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how that happened. So if you think about it, out of the three Howes and Andre Hinse, that really changed our whole team. So now we get two Hall of Fame players, and we got Andre Hinse, who Gordie Howe told me, Andre Hinse is one of the best left wingers ever played with or ever seen. Mm-hmm. You know, and he was, unfortunately, Andre had a serious knee injury in his fourth year there, and he couldn't play anymore, but he is an amazing hockey player. And, you know, people talk about Anders Hedberg and you know, in that line, Andre was as good as either one of those two, Ulf Nilsson or Anders Hedberg. Not taking anything away from them, but Andre was a phenomenal hockey player. So now we get Mark and Gordie and Marty, and then we got Andre Hinse. So now you got four impact players on your team, and it was evident and obvious what that did to our team. We went the next 2 years, won the championship, I think, with you know, we won the league and the championship. It wasn't like we finished in fourth place and won it. We dominated the league and won the championship. And Frankie Hughes, he scored 42 goals one year and 48 goals the next year.
Right.
And we don't hear a lot about those guys because they were earlier in the league. But those two players and Mark Howe, you know, he played forward when he first came.
Right.
And he was an amazing hockey player, you know. So we got two lines, and we have Teddy Taylor, Gordie Labossi, and Murray Hall. So we had three lines that could compete with any team anywhere, you know. And so
yeah, the WHA, where a lot of teams struggled with depth, you guys had depth both up front, in goal, and in goal as well. So yeah, we had Wayne Rutledge and Don McLeod, and then Ron Graham after that, But you know, the 2 years or the 3 years, you know, that team was really dominant. I think we won the league 4 years in a row, and then won 2 Avco Cups. But it was a pretty solid hockey team. And you know, we had the right coaching, Bill Deneen and Doug Harvey. You know, doesn't get any better than that. Absolutely. Now, thinking of going back to Gordie for a second, I got to know Gordie because we worked together in Hartford with the Whalers for 6 years back in the 80s and early 90s. And he loved that Aeros team. He had such fond memories of all of you guys. What was he like, or what was it like to have Gordie Howe as a teammate?
Yeah, and I also roomed with Gordie too, so and I played a line with him eventually. So there's, you know, that's as good as it gets in that respect. But you know what? Gordie come in, and I think he was so motivated by having Mark on the wing and Marty on the ice, and people told me who had seen Gordie play the last 7 or 8 years, they felt the first 2 or 3 years in Houston, he played better than they'd seen him ever play in the last, you know, 6, 8 years in the NHL.
Right.
He was amazing. Practiced hard, worked hard, and he was a great teammate too. You know, he wanted to win and do whatever he needed to do to win. So, you know, and obviously it just elevated the whole level of our team. You know, you go into a city, Toronto or Vancouver, and the media there, and, you know, that was because of Gordie, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Larry, when I think, first of all, if you look at your statistics at the time, obviously you're scoring goals, your playmaking is incredible, a lot of assists. And when I think back at you, though, I remember and maybe my memory's playing tricks on me, I remember you had a relatively big paddle on your stick.
I did. And memory's good.
And you were also quite proficient on the face-off circle. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I did. I had a stick that I think the blade actually challenged the regulations, and you know, I think it was right there at the time. And on the face-offs, I had a philosophy for years that, like in football, possession is where everything starts from. You got possession, you either have to give it away or somebody else to take it from you. Mm-hmm. So for me, there was no better way to start, you know, a shift on the ice than possession of the puck. So if you can draw the puck back, which we did most of the time, to your defense, you've got the puck. So you're a step up on everybody. And at our time, you know, we didn't have video, or not a lot of video, and there wasn't the emphasis on the individual skills at that time. So I was a little ahead of guys in terms of taking face-offs. Now, people really focus and concentrate on it. And I don't think I could be nearly as successful in today's hockey because the opposition sort of on the same wavelengths as I was, as far as wanting to go in and win the face-off. Every time I went in there, it doesn't matter if it was in practice or in the game. My goal was to win it, and having a little bigger stick didn't hurt either.
Oh, absolutely. So, Larry, what's interesting about your career is that you did spend many years playing in the minor leagues, playing in the Western League. So by the time you get to the WHA, you're in your 30s. And back in those days, a lot of guys were winding down at that point. There wasn't the emphasis on conditioning and longevity that there is now. So, but you end up going the opposite direction. You start to escalate. And now you're playing you're at the highest level that you had played at in WHA, and your scoring is really taking off. What do you attribute your success later in your career to?
Well, Mark, the thing is that people probably don't know that I didn't start skating until I was 13 years old. And
wow.
I lived in a warm climate, and there was no outdoor ice, very little. So, and I guess the thing about me is a lot of people had a different kind of a skating style. So a lot of people thought I was a real slow skater. But, I could skate, not with the Mark Howes, but with above average with anybody, but it didn't look like that on the ice. So that was kind of the opinion of the scouts and the people that watched the minor leagues, that I wasn't fast enough. That if you got the puck and people can't take it away from you, it doesn't matter how fast you are.
Right.
So that kind of, was kind of the opinion that maybe my skating speed wasn't up to the NHL level, because as I played with a lot of guys who went on to play in the National League, forwards and centermen, and they didn't have the statistics that I had, but they were probably a little quicker skating, and they looked like they were skating a lot faster. So anyway, that was kind of what the consensus was, and that was fine too.
Well, you certainly disproved any doubters. 74-75. First of all, you win the Cup in 74 against the Chicago Cougars. What was that series like? Did you play one game in kind of like a weird rink in Chicago that year? In the finals. Did you actually, and I should know this, but did you actually win the Cup in Houston, or did you win it in Chicago?
We won that in Houston, and I don't know why. I think we played the first two games. It might have been 1 in 4 games. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, I'm not sure on that, but I know we did win the Cup in Houston, and we played it was a rink in a shopping center, Ranhurst Arena, I think it was called, or shopping center, and it was but again, we didn't care about all that stuff. I hear a lot of people saying, it only held 3,000 people or whatever. We were focused on what we're doing on the ice and winning, so, that was sort of trivia to me, but I do distinctly remember winning it at Houston. I got pictures of Teddy Taylor carrying the cup around the ice and pictures in the locker room or whatever.
So it's really a magical story as you have the Howes in the team, and then you go all the way. The next year you take it even to a higher level for yourself. It's a career high 108 points. You're 5th in the league in scoring, 75 assists. And just a terrific year for yourself. You also add a few kids, so you really reinvigorate the team. You add Terry Ruskowski, Rich Preston, Ron Graham, among others. Talk a little bit about the young guys that came in and joined you on that second championship season.
Yeah, well, I think, again, that was Bill Dineen's philosophy, and he was a little bit ahead of himself in terms of looking at teams, because it's hard when you look at a team that we won the championship that second year in 73, 74, and for Bill to make, and Bill's really a loyal fella, for him to make the decision to not stay with all the veterans was probably a very difficult decision for him to make. Mm-hmm. But and I think that sometimes that happens to teams. They don't realize that, and they don't change and get young quick enough. So he had a good scouting system. He knew Terry Ruskowski, Rich Preston, followed their careers, Ronnie Graham. And so, yeah, when I look back, it didn't seem really like Bill's nature to make the changes after the first championship team. You know, it just seemed, well, we won the league fairly handily. Why make the changes? But he did, and they were changes that were very good for the team too.
Oh, absolutely. What a team that was. And every year subsequent after that, you'd always add somebody, whether it be a Morris Lukowicz or a John Tonelli or whatever. So we kept reinvigorating. The team was strong throughout. But going back to Gordie for 1 second, still an intimidating force on the ice physically at that point. And can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, he was obviously... He's protecting his kids, but he's Gordie Howe, so there's got to be if you can think back, a Gordie Howe story where he imposed his will, if you will, because everybody I talked to, and I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but everybody I talked to who played with or against Gordie has a story that usually ends up in some sort of pain or discomfort. And then, you just move on because he had a memory that was incredible. Do you have any specific memory of Gordie as a player?
Yeah. Well, how much time do we have on this interview? Because I got a lot of them. But anyway, I'll tell you, we roomed together for a couple of years, Gordie and I. We would talk a bit, and he'd say, Larry, I don't know why I do what I do on the ice. He says, I just do it. He says, I don't mean to do it. And it was just a reaction more than anything, and where that comes from, and it was a reaction, and he could back the reaction up. Like you see some guys would chop somebody and then would say, whoops, what did I do here? Gordie, he would do it, and he could back it up, whatever he did, But he had an amazing philosophy. I don't know if you know what the Lou Fontinato fight where Gordie hit him in New York and really got him a good shot. Broke his nose and cheekbone and whatever. And so I heard quite a few people say to Gordie, what about that, Gordie? And Gordie just say, well, it's better him than I. And that was kind of his attitude. It was a great response. And some guys say, well, he got what he deserved or whatever. But Gordie says, no, it's better him than I. And so we went on to the next question.
Right.
But I saw Gordie in Edmonton, a guy, particularly if somebody would run at Mark, he would just be livid. When Mark was playing defense later on, Gordie was on the bench and Mark was on the ice. Gordie never took his eyes off. Not so much with Marty, because Marty was bigger and he could, protect himself a little more. But this fellow took a run at Mark on the ice. And Gordie was on the ice. Mark was playing defense and Gordie's playing forward. So Gordie, it was just instinct. He turned around and cross-checked this guy right up around the neck. And Gordie's stick just exploded. The guy went down. Gordie skates to the bench, throws his stick on the bench. He was using, let's say, a Coho. I don't even know what it was, because he usually used a Northland. He says, where's my goddamn Northland? And he gets it back. So then we're in bed, room at night, and it was late. I was half asleep, and Gordie said, Larry. And I said, what? And he says, do you know the Northland rep for the hockey sticks? And I said, yeah, he's in Minnesota. And he says, will you call him tomorrow? And I said, sure. I said, I can give you a number. I says, why do you want to talk to him? He says, well, I want him to get me a new order of sticks, and I want the wood from my stick to come from the trees on the outside of the grove, not in the middle. And I said, well, why? And he says, well, on the outside of the grove, the wind whips the trees, the grain should be closer together, and the stick would be stronger.
Wow.
I said, Gordie, go to sleep. Can you imagine somebody, because he was so upset that his stick shattered, that he wanted to get a stick that was had more strength and whip in it. So,
wow, that is an interesting story.
Yeah, who else would think of that?
No, absolutely.
At 2:30 in the morning. Anyway,
speaking of some rough play, the hockey was changing, as you know, in the early 70s with the success of the Philadelphia Flyers and the rapid expansion in hockey. You had a lot of, for lack of a better term, goon hockey players. The Houston Aeros were a tough team that did not employ goon players, all your tough guys, which was a good percentage of your team, could play and scrap if needed. When you think back at those battles, particularly I was interviewing Rick Smith recently about the 1974 playoffs, very, very physical. Billy Goldthorpe came up for that, along with,
Gordie Gallant was there.
That's what I was looking for, Gordie Gallant.
Yeah,
can you talk a little bit about those battles with Minnesota, because there were some tough games there.
Yeah. The whole thing, and I know Bill Dineen didn't like it at all. What Minnesota did, and then Birmingham did it too. And I don't know. I just think that as a coach, that has to be a hard way to coach a team. If like Bill's philosophy was, we'll have skill and toughness together, but we're not going to go and do this other stuff, and whatever. So I don't know. I think a lot of that's gone out of hockey today, and the game's much better for it. Like if you watch Winnipeg and the Jets and the Aeros playing at the time, who would you sooner watch, that, or you want to go to Birmingham or to Minnesota at the time?
Right.
I just don't. I think that's a part of the sport that. Well, I think now it's not even in the sport, so it tells you that that's not what the game should be.
Well, you mentioned the Winnipeg Jets, the Swedes, Bobby Hull, a good rivalry there as well. Also, a strong franchise. Talk a little bit about that team, because they were much different, real European influence, and of course, having Bobby Hull, and they had a lot of depth, just like you guys. They had a lot of skill and speed, and you guys could be pretty tough with them physically as well. Talk a little bit about the rivalry with the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, they were more of a one-line team in a way, not to take away anything from their other lines, but Bobby Hull, he's a world-class hockey player, and different style than Gordie completely. Like Gordie wasn't the guy who'd skate down the ice and blast a puck and and score goals to the degree that Bobby did. But Bobby was such a huge part of that team, that without him, I don't think that whole team and that line would have been what they were. He was just he was the best player in the world against him and Bobby Orr at that time.
Right.
So he's a guy that can completely dominate a game and win a game for you. So, and then, they have to check Bobby a little closer than the other guys and left, a little open ice for other players. But no, they had a great team, and, they kind of, they changed the game for a better word. Like it was more skill, quickness, and whatever. Mm-hmm. And Glenn Sather, he used to call me when he was coach and general manager of the Oilers, and he said, Larry, the two teams I patterned the Oilers after were one, the Jets, and how they would regroup and circle back and and pass the puck around. And he says, and your team in Houston, he used to ask me what we did and what made the team successful. So those were the two teams in the WHA that Glenn Sather patterned the Oilers after.
And it's certainly...
Which was quite a compliment.
A great compliment, and it certainly worked out well. Another guy you mentioned earlier was Mark Tardif. Talk a little bit about the Nordiques of that time. Also a team that was very offensive-minded with Real Cloutier, Mark Tardif, Chris Boudleau, and a team that and they had Réjean Houle the year that you guys beat them in 1975 in the playoffs. Talk a little bit about the Nordiques of that era.
Yeah, well, that was a team, like, I guess when I talk about Winnipeg and Houston, you could put the Nordiques in that category too. They had some really skilled hockey players, and it was probably the way the game is evolved now. That's more the way the game is played. They had Richard Brodeur in goal and J.C. Tremblay on defense, and Reggie Houle and Mark Tardif and Buddy Cloutier. So, they had a heck of a hockey team, an entertaining team to watch too. So that's, I think that's what the sport is really, about. Mm-hmm. And we played them in the following year and won the Avco Cup right in Quebec City. Yeah.
Right. Loaded team. Serge Bernier as well. So
yeah, Serge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great hockey player.
And they would go on. So who was you faced off against everybody in the WHA as you were there for all 6 years, the Houston franchise. Who was the toughest center to defend?
Yeah. Serge Bernier comes to mind as a guy who played another guy, Andre Lacroix, who was always productive. He's right up at the top of the scoring every year. He, for whatever reason, didn't get on a lot of championship teams, but boy, you look at his record year after year, and I don't think there's anybody in the league better than him.
Right.
And then Minnesota had Davey Keon. They had that line of Johnny McKenzie, Davey Keon, and Mike Antonovich. That was a strong line. They played really well. So those are the centers that, and Serge Bernier, and he was tough. Those are the guys that I kind of remember as being, difficult to play against.
Mm-hmm. Larry, during that time, I would get the hockey news, and you were in the hockey news every week because of the ads for the Okanagan Hockey School. It's something you founded, and talk a little bit. When did you create that, and why? And it certainly became incredibly successful with a lot of history behind it. I know you've eventually sold it, but talk a little bit about how that all started.
It started in a little community just north of Penticton, about 8-10 miles, and they put summer ice in for some reason. And there was maybe one of 2 or 3 rinks in the world that had summer ice. That was in 1961, I think it was, somewhere around there. And so we used to go up and scrimmage a couple times a week, kind of stay in shape and have some fun. So then eventually there was a school down in North Dakota, and I can't remember the name, International Hockey School, yeah. That was the first hockey school that I ever remember being in. So I think we were probably second or third. Davey Keon, let's see, Bobby Orr, Mike Walton, Bobby Orr had a school. Davey Keon had a school in Toronto. But we were probably the third or fourth school in the world to start up in 1963. It just started from a couple of years prior, as I said, going out for, scrimmaging. But then we thought, there was a real need for, a little more instruction. So we started that at that time, and it grew from 30 people to, I think the last we ran it, there was something like 2,500 people from 14, 15 different countries here in Penticton.
Wow.
and it's continued on to this day. And one of the things that really helped us is that, I knew so many of the players who were playing the game at the time, and we really concentrated on having some of the top NHL players come in and instruct. And it wasn't just a guest thing for us. You didn't come in and sign autographs. You went on the ice and worked with the kids and, and become part of the whole program. So that really helped us, be successful. And Wayne Gretzky helped us a lot. His brother Keith was at our hockey camp for quite a few years as a coach. And Wayne used to recommend it to the people in Los Angeles. So that helped us a lot. And one other thing, we started video analysis in 1967.
Wow.
And there was no video. The Seattle Totems had a video machine. It was a reel-to-reel tape thing. And so we rented it from them. And we had guys like Cesar Maniego here, Bobby Clark, and we used to give, video lessons. And the video was never used, it wasn't even close to being used in hockey at that time. So we tried to be a bit innovative and and try to do things like that. And we had a lady, Laura Stam. I'm not sure if you've heard of her.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she's from Eastchester, New York. She was really the person who got power skating going, and so we brought her out to Penticton for probably 20 years.
Wow.
She came out with their boys, and then she used to have NHL camps here in Penticton, and we had a lot of the top players, Mel Bridgman, Kim Claxton. In Philadelphia, Keith Allen used to send out guys. Don Selesky come out, and different guys come out for skating. So that really helped us. And also the hockey news was a great source of advertising for us. We used to take a fairly good size ad in there each year. And so then, it grew from that, from 30 some kids to over 2,500. And I was there, I think, for 40 some years, and it's still going. It's very, very successful now. As a It's probably the oldest continually running hockey camp in the world.
Yeah, I would say so. It's as I said, back in those days, it was so synonymous with the hockey dudes. You get the hockey dudes, you're going to see Larry Lund in the camp ad. Going back real quick to, first of all, you didn't really hear about video until Roger Nielsen came along. So you guys were about a decade ahead of the curve here.
Yeah.
But going back to your final year in the WHA, it's kind of a sad year because that Houston franchise was essential to the WHA. It was a marquee franchise, good fan support, but runs out of financial viability when the team does not get into the NHL in '77. So during that last year, Larry, what's your thought process? Are you basically assuming this is the end for the franchise? Are you ready to wind down your career? What's your mindset in 1977, 78?
Well, that's a very good question. During the year, we thought everything's fine, and our owner was, we were stable and we didn't have, the years that we had before, but we had a very competitive team. And that the owner was trying to buy, I think it was Kansas City or one of those teams. He kind of jumped the gun. He thought he was going to get in by himself or whatever, so that didn't work. Had he would have stayed one more year, I'm sure it would have, been taken in with the NHL teams, because we had a phenomenal building. And it was really sad for me to see this happen, not so much for myself, but especially for Bill Deneen. He'd put his heart and soul into this, and all of a sudden, the rug's pulled out from under him. The Howes going to Hartford really hurt us. I'm sure if they would have stayed in Houston that last year, we would have continued on. But anyway, for whatever reason, they went to Houston, and that left a void for us. So then it was right up until June. I know I was away fishing, and I called Bill, and he said it's not going to happen, So, it was sad because I think it could have been a good franchise. It was a beautiful building and, good fan support. But anyway, it didn't happen. And Bill called me and asked me to go to Hartford with him. And I had just sort of decided at that point, I would have stayed if the team would have stayed there. Mm-hmm. But I decided I wanted to finish my degree at Arizona State University. So I said, to my wife, we just decided to go back and spend the winter in Arizona and finish up the degree, and then we moved back up to Canada eventually to Penticton. We've been here since then. Actually, that was about 1981, I think.
Right. So, looking back at the Houston Aeros, did you get a chance to keep in contact with some of your ex-teammates from that era?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I was down in Dallas last year. And they have a Hockey Hall of Fame or history of hockey in Houston, in Dallas, and they invited me down. Terry Wiskowski was there, John Gray was there, and a lot of the Dallas Stars players were there, and they unveiled. They asked me to cut the ribbon for the history of hockey in Houston. It's very well done, and the Tom Glardy, he's done a great job in Houston. There's a number of rinks there that the Dallas Stars, own and sponsor, and along. So they've got the history of Houston way back into the 30s. There was Hockey Rice University in different places at that time. So that was the last time I really was in contact with guys on a personal basis. But when John Shella passed away a while back, I talked to a lot of the players at that time, and I also met with Ted Taylor and his wife in Seattle, or not in Seattle, but in Vancouver, the opening of the Canucks schedule this year. So we watched the game together.
Wow, how is Ted Taylor these days?
He's good. He looks great. He still has his ranch in Oak Lake, Manitoba. He's active and enjoys it. He looks great. Looks like he could put the skates on it.
He was obviously talented player, a leader, but tough as nails as well.
Oh, yeah, was he ever? Yeah, a great competitor, yeah.
Larry, so you put your business degree to good use, and, of course, managing the hockey camp and everything like that. Did you get a chance to watch hockey today. Right now, as we interview you, we're in the middle of the NHL playoffs. I was curious if you're watching hockey now occasionally, and what your impression is of today's game.
No, I do watch it, and I watch it, and I'm amazed at the skill and the speed and the way the players pass the puck and anticipate somebody moving, and the puck goes there before the player gets there. It's incredible. Like it's light years different from when we played, and the speed of it, and then the size. Like 6'1", I was 6'2", so I was considered a bigger player at the time. Right now, I'd be just average in the weight and the size, and the speed. So no, I think it's progress, leaps and bounds. And I guess the litmus test is, look at how many fans show up for those games. Those buildings are sold out.
Right. It's
Las Vegas is a great example.
It is. I was talking to a reporter today on another issue, and I just said, it is absolutely incredible. I was sitting there with my wife watching a game a few nights ago. And I'm like, these guys have to make decisions in a split second, and they're executing, as you said, just the passing, the speed, the physicality. The game's always been physical, but these collisions are pretty violent because you don't have that center red line there. You get the guys getting a full head of steam and taking a pass, and which reminds me, just as we wind down here, and again, we appreciate the time very much, Larry, is you played a long time. You had a long career. Any injuries, lingering effects, or anything like that? You see?
No. I was very fortunate. I didn't miss very few games, and no, I'm healthy. I'm 80 or 78 years old, and no, healthy as can be.
Larry, again, we really appreciate the time today, and you had one heck of a career. You were certainly in the legends of the WHA. You're right there among the best of the best, and we appreciate the time very much today, and we hope to have a chance to talk to you again down the road.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed our chat, Mark. Thank you for including me. And one fellow we didn't talk about was Jack Stanfield. He was very instrumental in the whole.
Jack was not only. I met him. I met him actually for work. I was working between hockey experiences. I was working for Fox, and at the time he was working for Prime Sports down in Texas, and so I had a chance to meet him there and meet him again some years later. But he was so he played. Obviously, he became a broadcaster. He became a big time executive in television. So I stay in touch with Jack, regularly. Yeah, so he played the first 2 years, I guess. Yeah. So what a career he had. He went from the color commentator to one of the most high-powered executives in television, and I think he managed Fox's international efforts back in the early 2000s. So, you're right. A very remarkable career. Like a lot of those Aeros guys, boy, you look back and what they've done since, very, very impressive.
No, it was anyway, yeah. No, Mark, I enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you for thinking about me.
Thanks, Larry. Talk to you again soon. Take care.
Hopefully. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Be sure to visit us at prohockeyalumni.org.